She grabbed my jeans from under my desk and whispered 4 words that stopped my blood cold. I had been in that building for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of spreadsheets, server logs, and the kind of quiet, grinding forensic work that most people find unbearable. I find it calming. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not have agendas. Numbers sit still and wait for you to find the truth buried inside them. That is what I do. My name is Ethan Cross, and I get called in when the books stop making sense. The Meridian Group occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower in the center of the city. From the outside, it looked like every other successful company. Clean lines, polished lobby, staff who walked fast and talked faster. But I had been inside the numbers long enough to know that something underneath all that polish was badly wrong. I just had not found the exact shape of it yet. My workspace was a back office on the 3rd floor. Small, windowless except for one narrow panel that looked out onto the alley below. 2 monitors. One server tower that hummed like a living thing under the desk. A steel filing cabinet that had clearly not been opened in years based on the layer of dust along its top edge. It was not a glamorous setup. I did not need glamorous. I needed quiet and access, and I had both. I had been at my desk for 6 straight hours that afternoon, pulling network activity logs and running them through a custom query I had built the night before. The data was dense. 4,000 lines of server traffic per day, and I was looking for a pattern so small that most people would not even know what they were searching for. I knew. I had seen it before in 3 other cases. The fingerprint of someone moving money slowly enough to look like noise. The office door was shut. The deadbolt was flipped. I do that automatically when I am deep in sensitive data. It is habit. It is also the reason that what happened next did not end both our careers on the spot. I heard the handle turn before I heard anything else. Not a knock. Just the handle, slow and deliberate, like someone checking whether the room was empty. And then, before I could even lift my eyes from the screen, the space beneath my desk shifted. Fabric rustled against the floor. Something warm and solid pressed against the inside of my knee, gripping the denim of my jeans for balance. I did not flinch. I stopped typing. I looked down slowly, keeping my chin level and my shoulders relaxed so that nothing in my posture would broadcast that anything unusual was happening. Sophia Hale, the CEO of the Meridian Group, was on her hands and knees under my workstation. She was wearing a tailored ivory blouse tucked into a dark-fitted pencil skirt, and the contrast between that sharp professional armor and the fact that she was pressed against a dusty filing cabinet under a forensic accountant's desk was the kind of thing that takes a full second to process. Her dark hair, normally pinned back in a severe knot at the base of her neck, had come loose at the temples. Strands fell forward across her jaw. She looked up at me. The blue light from my monitors caught her face and I saw it immediately. Not fear exactly. Something more controlled than fear. The look of someone who has already calculated the risk and decided the alternative was worse. "Don't flinch," she said. Her voice was barely above a breath, thin as paper, cutting straight through the hum of the cooling fans. "Or we're both gone." I held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then I turned back to my monitors and began typing. The heavy oak door rattled hard. The brass handle jerked, testing the lock. The deadbolt held. "Sophia." The voice came through the wood like it owned the building, which in many ways it did. Victor Strand, Senior Board Director. The kind of man who had been at the company long enough to believe that the rules were written for other people. His tone was smooth and pressed, like an expensive suit that had never been worn in the rain. "Are you in there? The preliminary auditors are asking for the Q3 disbursement logs. We need them pulled from the main terminal." I looked at the lock. I looked down at Sophia. Her fingers tightened against my knee, pressing into the denim with a grip that was no longer just about balance. It was a signal, a plea. Every instinct I had, built across years of working inside other people's disasters, told me exactly what was happening. She was cornered. She was hiding. And whatever she was hiding from was standing 4 inches away from a door that I had, completely by accident, locked at exactly the right moment. I leaned forward. I rested my elbows on the edge of the desk, my frame angled to block any possible sight line to the floor if the door somehow opened. I set my face into the flat, unbothered expression of a man completely absorbed in data reconciliation, and I spoke. "She's not in here, Victor." A pause from the hallway. The specific kind of pause that means someone is deciding how hard to push. "Ethan." His voice sharpened slightly. "Open the door. I need to verify the main terminal logs myself." I did not move from the keyboard. I'm in the middle of a live forensic extraction. If I break the chain of custody on this data pull, the entire audit protocol resets. That's a 6-hour delay. You want to explain that to the oversight committee? Or should I put your name on the delay report? The silence that followed was longer this time. Victor understood leverage. What he did not understand was the software I was running, and that gap was the only weapon I had. "Have her call me the second she surfaces," he said finally. His footsteps moved away down the corridor, each one precise and unhurried, the walk of a man who was retreating but not yet defeated. I tracked the sound until it disappeared completely. I counted 10 full seconds of silence after that. Then I looked back down under the desk. "He's gone," I said quietly. Sophia let out a breath. It was not a sigh of relief. It was the sound of a person who had been holding a structural crack together with both hands and had just been told they could set one hand down, but not both. She did not move to get up immediately. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cool metal edge of the filing cabinet and stayed there for a moment, eyes closed. I waited. When she finally pulled herself out from under the desk, she did it with the focused, deliberate movements of someone refusing to let their body show what their mind was going through. She stood. She smoothed her skirt once with both palms. She walked to the narrow window and looked out at the alley below, her back to me, her arms crossing slowly over her chest. The silence in the room had a different texture now. It was not the clean, productive silence of focused work. It was the kind that sits on your sternum. I turned my chair slightly toward her and waited. I have learned that people tell you the important things faster when you stop reaching for them. She spoke without turning around. "He changed the passwords to the offshore escrow accounts this morning." I did not react. I kept my hands loose on the edge of the desk. "I found out an hour ago," she continued, her voice low and even, like she was reading from a document she had already memorized. "I went into his office to get the physical ledger while he was on a call with the legal team. He came back 4 minutes early." She paused. "I got out of the hallway before he saw me, but just barely." She turned around then, and I saw what she had been holding against her chest the entire time, pressed flat under her crossed arms. A burgundy leather notebook, worn at the corners. The kind of thing you keep locked in a drawer, not carried through a corporate building like a hidden weapon. She crossed the room and set it on my desk. I looked at the notebook. I looked at her face. Then I reached out and pulled it toward me. I opened the burgundy notebook, and the first thing I noticed was the pressure of the handwriting. Not the words, not the numbers, the pressure. Whoever wrote in this book pressed hard into the page, the kind of force that leaves an impression 3 sheets deep. That is not how careful people write. Careful people write lightly. They leave no trace. The person who filled these pages was not being careful. They were being certain. They believed completely that this record would never be found. I turned to the first marked page and began reading. The columns were clean. Dates on the left. Amounts in the center. A short code on the right side of each line that I did not recognize yet, but would. I always do eventually. My eyes moved down the rows slowly, not rushing, letting the pattern settle into focus the way a photograph develops. Numbers have rhythm. When that rhythm breaks, even slightly, something is wrong. This rhythm broke on the 3rd page, and again on the 5th, and 4 more times before I reached the middle of the book. "Sit down," I said, without looking up. Sophia pulled the chair from the corner of the room and sat across from me. She did not ask questions. She watched my face, and I could feel her doing it, reading my expression the way I was reading the ledger. Looking for the moment I found something real. I found it on page 11. I reached out and opened a blank spreadsheet on my right monitor. I typed the first date from the ledger into the search field of the network log database and hit enter. The screen filled with activity records. I began to sort. Talk me through the last 6 months, I said. Not the official version. The version you noticed but could not prove. She was quiet for a moment. Then she started talking. Sophia Hale had built her position at the Meridian Group across 11 years. She had come in as a project director, moved up through operations, and taken the CEO role 4 years ago after the previous executive retired. She was not handed the job. She had earned every floor of that building. But 8 months ago, things began to shift in ways she could not pin down. Budget approvals that came back slightly altered. Vendor contracts she did not remember signing. A quiet, persistent pressure from Victor Strand and 2 aligned board members to restructure the company's financial reporting into a format that, on the surface, looked like a modernization initiative. She had pushed back. Not loudly, strategically. She had requested a third-party forensic review of the Q3 accounts, which was how I had come to be sitting in this building at all. What she had not known, until this morning, was that Victor had been running a parallel set of books. He set it up to look like the discrepancies were coming from my terminal, she said, her voice carrying the flat, precise tone of someone who has already moved past shock and arrived at something colder. If the auditors pull the raw logs without context, the transfer commands trace back to my login credentials. Not his. I stopped typing. I turned my chair to face her fully. He used your credentials, I said. He had access to my login from the IT integration we ran in January. I flagged it at the time as a security risk. The board voted to keep the shared access structure in place. She looked at me steadily. Victor ran that vote. I turned back to the monitor. The picture was coming into focus now, and it was worse than I had expected when I walked into this building 3 weeks ago. This was not sloppy embezzlement. This was a constructed frame. Victor had not just been stealing from the company. He had been building a case against Sophia at the same time, layer by layer, using her own login credentials as the signature on his crimes. The ledger, I said, pulling the burgundy notebook back toward me. He kept this because he needed a record of the real routing numbers. Something he could access without logging into the system. Something that wouldn't show up on a server. He thinks analog is invisible, Sophia said. Everyone thinks that, I replied. Everyone is wrong. I pulled up a second window and began building a cross-reference table. The dates from the ledger on one side, the network login timestamps on the other. If Victor had accessed the system to initiate the transfers, even using Sophia's credentials, his physical device would have left a footprint on the network router, a MAC address, a ghost that most people do not know to look for and even fewer know how to find. I knew how to find it. How long will this take? Sophia asked. The network logs run 4,000 lines per day, I said, typing steadily. I need to build a filter to isolate the transfer timestamps and match them to device addresses. Then cross-check those addresses against the company's registered device list. I did the calculation in my head. 48 hours if I work straight through. She was quiet. Then, we have until Wednesday morning. That's when the auditors get full server access. I looked at the clock on my monitor. It was just past 4 in the afternoon on Monday. That gave us roughly 38 hours. Then we don't leave this office, I said. I was not asking her. I was not offering. I was stating the only logical path forward. I reached over and turned the second monitor slightly so she could see it from the chair. Lock the door again. There's a fold-out chair behind the filing cabinet. Pull it out. I need you to go through the vendor contracts from the last 14 months and flag any company name you don't recognize. She looked at the filing cabinet. She looked at me. You're serious, she said. The data doesn't care what time it is, I replied. And neither does Victor. She stood up, moved to the filing cabinet and pulled it open. The drawer was packed tight with folders. She pulled out the first one, carried it back to the chair, opened it across her knees and began reading. I turned back to my monitors. Outside the narrow window, the sky had gone the color of slate. The storm that had been building all afternoon finally made its decision and rain began to hit the glass in long diagonal lines. The sound of it filled the room, steady and relentless. I built the first layer of the query filter and let it run. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The only sounds were the rain, the hum of the server, and the slow, methodical turning of paper. Two people in a locked room, working against a clock that Victor Strand did not know we were watching. Line 402 broke the case open. I had been staring at network logs for so long that the numbers had started to blur into green static behind my eyes. My third cup of coffee sat cold and untouched at the edge of the desk. Sophia was across the room, cross-legged on the floor with her heels abandoned beside her, sorting through a stack of vendor contracts she had pulled from the filing cabinet around midnight. Neither of us had slept. Neither of us had said much. The work had its own language, and we had both been speaking it for hours. Then I saw it. I sat up straight. My hand stopped moving over the keyboard. Line 402, August 14th. A wire transfer of $45,000 pulled clean out of the company's main operating fund. The recipient field read Crestline Consulting. No address, no contact name, no contract number linking it to any legitimate service. I kept my voice flat. Come look at this. Sophia was beside me in seconds. She didn't ask what it was. She leaned over my shoulder and looked at the screen the way someone looks at a car crash, unable to stop and unable to look away. Open the ledger, I said. August 14th. She reached across me and flipped the burgundy notebook open with practiced hands. Her finger landed on the date before I had to point to it. Victor had pressed his pen hard into the page when he wrote it, like the act of recording his own crime gave him satisfaction. The name Crestline sat in his handwriting, sharp and deliberate. And in the margin, small enough to miss if you weren't looking, a routing number. I typed it into my secure terminal. The database took 3 seconds. The result came back flagged in red. Cayman Islands. Offshore private account. 0 public business registration attached to the routing number. It was a ghost account built to receive money and leave no trail pointing back to a real person. That's where it went, I said. Sophia didn't respond right away. She was staring at the routing number in the ledger, and I could see her jaw tightening slowly, the way a person looks when something they suspected but didn't want to believe finally lands in front of them in black and white. How much in total? She asked. I don't know yet. This is the first confirmed match. There could be dozens more buried in here. I pulled up a second window and started building a filter to scan the rest of the logs for any transaction connected to that routing number or any MAC address pattern matching the one I was about to identify. Tell me about the MAC address, she said quietly. I highlighted the string in the network log. At the exact time that wire transfer was sent, the command didn't come from your terminal. It didn't come from the finance department server. It came from a device with a MAC address ending in 9C2A. I pulled up the company's registered device directory and ran a search. The result appeared in under 4 seconds. That's Victor's personal laptop. His own machine, not a company-issued device. Sophia went very still. I kept going because the data kept going. He connected to the company's internal network using his board-level credentials. Those credentials give him clearance to bypass the standard firewall restrictions. He used that access to push the wire transfer directly, then logged out in under 3 minutes. If you weren't specifically looking for a device mismatch in the logs, you would never catch it. It would look like a standard executive authorized transfer. He did it from inside the building, she said. It wasn't a question. 2 floors above us, most likely. The login trace puts him on the executive floor network node. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. He wasn't sloppy because he didn't care. He was sloppy because he was certain no one would ever look this deep. He thought the audit would land on your desk and stop there. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silence we had been sitting in all night. That silence had been focused and productive. This one had weight. Sophia straightened up slowly. She walked to the window and stood with her back to me for a moment, one hand resting flat against the glass. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at 5 in the morning. Delivery trucks, street sweepers, a world that had no idea what was happening in this office. 15 entries, I said, because the filter had finished running. 15 separate transfers, all to Crestline, all routed to the same Cayman account. Total amount moved out of the company's operating fund over the past 14 months. I paused. $420,000. She turned around. I watched her face go through several things at once. Disbelief, then recognition, then something cold and focused that settled behind her eyes and stayed there. He's been doing this for over a year, she said. At least. The earliest transfer I can trace goes back to last June. There may be more in archived logs I haven't pulled yet. She crossed back to the desk and stood beside me, looking at the screen. The numbers sat there, quiet and damning, arranged in the neat rows I had built to make them impossible to argue with. Can you prove it was his device beyond the MAC address? She asked. Already working on it. I opened a third window. The company router keeps a session log. Every device that connects gets a timestamped handshake record. I can pull Victor's device ID from the session log and match it to the corporate registration document he signed when he first joined the board. His laptop's serial number is on file. If it matches the session record, the connection between him and that specific device is documented in the company's own administrative paperwork. He signed it himself. Sophia looked at me. You thought of that at 5 in the morning after being awake all night. The data suggested it. She almost smiled. It was small and tired and quickly gone. But I caught it. I ran the session log query. While the search processed, I stood up and stretched, rolling my neck until it cracked. I walked to the small corner table and poured 2 glasses of water from the cooler, bringing one back to Sophia without asking. She took it without comment and drank half of it immediately. The query finished. Device serial number from the session log. Device serial number from Victor's signed registration document. I put them side by side on the screen. They matched exactly. There it is, I said. Sophia set her glass down. Her hand was steady. She looked at the matching serial numbers for a long moment, and I could see her mentally assembling the case the way I had been assembling it in data, piece by piece, building something that couldn't be taken apart. We have the ledger in his handwriting, she said, thinking out loud. We have the wire transfers. We have the MAC address. We have the session log connecting his physical device to the exact moment each transfer was made. And the offshore account flagged as a private shell with no legitimate business history. I added. It's enough, she said. It's more than enough. She was right. In forensic terms, what we had built overnight was not just sufficient. It was airtight. But I had learned a long time ago that airtight evidence and a clean outcome were not the same thing. Evidence still had to survive the room it was presented in. And the room it was going to be presented in was controlled by people who had known Victor for years, trusted him, and in some cases owed him. I was about to say exactly that when a knock hit the door so hard the hinges rattled. Not a polite knock. Not someone checking in. This was 3 sharp blows that said the person on the other side was not asking. Sophia and I looked at each other. I crossed to the door in 4 steps. Who is it? James. The voice on the other side was tight and higher than usual. James was the company's internal operations manager and had been my liaison since I arrived. You need to open up. Right now. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. James stood in the hallway still wearing yesterday's shirt, his tie gone entirely, his face the particular shade of pale that meant whatever he was about to say was going to cost us something. The auditors are here, he said. I stared at him. They're scheduled for Wednesday morning. Victor called them in early. James glanced down the corridor, then back at me. They're in the main lobby right now. They're asking for immediate server access. The temperature in my chest dropped about 10 degrees. If the auditors accessed the servers before I locked the logs behind encryption, Victor only needed 30 seconds at his laptop to delete the session records and wipe the network trail clean. Everything we had spent the night building would become a ledger full of handwriting with nothing digital to support it. A good lawyer would shred it in an afternoon. I looked back at Sophia. She already knew. How long do we have? She asked James. They're asking for access now. I told them I needed to get authorization. They gave me 5 minutes before they escalate to the building manager. For minutes and counting. I was already sitting down before James finished his sentence. There was no time to explain the plan to Sophia. There was no time to think through backup options or consider whether a cleaner approach existed. The only move available was the one directly in front of me, and I had to execute it faster than Victor could react. "James," I said, my voice dropping into a register I use when the margin for error reaches 0. "Go back to the lobby. Tell them the primary server is running a scheduled integrity check that was initiated last night as part of the forensic audit protocol. Tell them the check locks all external access automatically and cannot be interrupted without corrupting the data. Tell them it has 12 minutes remaining." James blinked. "Is that true?" "It will be in about 90 seconds. Go." He went. Sophia moved to stand behind me without being asked. She didn't speak. She understood that the next few minutes required silence and full concentration, and she gave me both without hesitation. I pulled up the command line interface and bypassed the standard management software entirely. What I needed was not a user-friendly program with a dashboard and drop-down menus. I needed direct access to the server's file directory, and I needed to move through it fast. I located the specific folder containing the network session logs, the Wi-Fi router handshake records, and the offshore routing traces we had spent the night compiling. 15 transfers, 45 entry points of evidence. All of it sitting in an unprotected directory that any administrator with board-level credentials could delete in a single command. I initiated a 256-bit encryption wrap. The kind of encryption I was applying did not just lock the files. It created a sealed partition, a separate protected environment inside the server that operated independently from the main directory. Even if Victor logged in with his full board credentials and manually navigated to the folder location, he would find nothing. The files would appear to have been moved or deleted. Only the key I was generating in real time could open the partition and restore access. The progress bar appeared at the bottom of the screen. "Encrypting. 18%. "Talk to me," Sophia said quietly, not asking me to stop working, asking me to keep her connected to what was happening. "I'm building a wall around everything we found tonight," I said, my eyes staying on the screen. "Once this finishes, Victor can sit at his laptop with full administrative access and he will not be able to touch a single file. The logs, the session records, the routing traces, all of it locked behind a key that exists only on this drive." I tapped the small black USB plugged into the tower beside my keyboard. "And if the auditors demand server access before it finishes? Then I tell them the truth, that a forensic analyst initiated a data protection protocol to preserve chain of custody ahead of the official audit review, which is exactly what I'm doing. It's standard practice. They cannot legally override it without risking the integrity of their own findings." Encrypting. 41%. The seconds stretched. I could hear Sophia breathing behind me, slow and deliberate, the way someone breathes when they are managing something large and refusing to let it show. "He knew," she said after a moment. "He knew we were close. That's why he called them in early. Someone told him. I had already considered that. Or he noticed the ledger was missing from his office and made an assumption. Either way, he panicked." "Good," I said. "Panicked people make structural mistakes. They accelerate before they're ready and they leave gaps." Encrypting. 67%. Sophia moved from behind me and walked to the window. She stood with her arms folded across her chest, and in the reflection of the dark glass I could see her face. The composed executive expression she wore like a second skin in meetings and boardrooms had thinned out. What was underneath it was not weakness. It was something more honest than that. The face of a person who had carried something alone for too long and was only now beginning to understand they didn't have to. "When I hired you," she said, still looking at the window, "I told HR it was for a routine discrepancy review. I told the board it was standard due diligence." She paused. "I didn't tell anyone that I had already found 3 transfers I couldn't explain and that I was terrified of what a full audit would uncover before I had any proof of who was responsible. I kept my eyes on the progress bar. You were protecting yourself until you had something solid. I was protecting the company. There's a difference." She turned from the window and looked at me directly. "If Victor had managed to frame me before you found the session logs, 63 employees would have lost their jobs inside of a month. The board would have dissolved the division to cut liability. I wasn't scared of losing my position. I was scared of what losing my position would cost everyone else. Encrypting. 89%. I stopped typing for a moment and looked at her. I did not say anything immediately, because what she had just told me was not a small thing, and it did not deserve a quick response. She had spent weeks walking into a building every day knowing someone inside it was actively constructing her destruction. And her first concern had been the people around her, not herself. I filed that information away somewhere it would not get lost. It's not going to cost them anything, I said. Not today. Encrypting. 100%. Partition sealed. The screen flashed a single green confirmation line and went still. I pulled the USB drive from the tower and held it for a second, feeling the ridiculous smallness of it relative to everything it contained. Then I slipped it into my front pocket and stood up. Let's go, I said. We walked out of the office and down the corridor toward the lobby. The building had a different quality at this hour. The overnight cleaning crew gone. The daytime staff not yet arrived. The hallways holding that particular hollow echo of a space between shifts. Our footsteps were the only sound. We came around the corner into the main lobby and I took in the scene in about 2 seconds. 3 auditors in matching gray suits standing near the reception desk. Clipboards out. Expressions calibrated to Project Authority. Victor was already there, positioned slightly apart from them in the way people stand when they want to appear cooperative without being grouped with the opposition. His suit was fresh. He had clearly come in early, dressed for a performance. When he saw Sophia walk in beside me, something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise. Calculation. I didn't give him time to set the frame. I walked directly to the lead auditor, a sharp-faced woman with a clipboard and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and I introduced myself before she could speak. I'm the independent forensic analyst retained by the director, I said, producing a chain of custody document from the folder I had carried out of the office. As of 40 minutes ago, all relevant server files have been isolated into a protected forensic partition per standard evidence preservation protocol. Here is the documentation, and here is the access key. I placed the USB drive on top of the papers and handed both to her. The partition contains 15 confirmed irregular transfers, the associated network session logs, device identification records, and offshore routing data. Everything is time-stamped and unaltered. Your team can begin extraction immediately. The lead auditor took the documents and looked them over. Thank you, Mr. Cross. This is thorough. Victor stepped forward. His voice was measured, but I could hear the tension running underneath it like a current. I wasn't informed that an encryption protocol had been applied to the company servers. That decision required board authorization. The authorization came from the director, I said, keeping my tone completely even, who retained me specifically for this purpose. Chain of custody documentation is on page 2. Her signature is dated yesterday. Victor looked at Sophia. She met his gaze without blinking. He looked back at me, and in that moment, standing in the lobby of the building he had spent over a year systematically robbing, Victor Strand finally understood that the architecture of his plan had already collapsed. He just hadn't heard the sound yet. Very thorough, he said tightly, and smiled the smile of a man with no remaining options, pretending he still had several. The lead auditor was already reviewing the USB documentation. She looked up at her team. We'll set up in the East Conference Room. Mr. Cross, we'll need you available for questions during the extraction. I'll be here, I said. I glanced at Sophia. She was standing straight, her hands loose at her sides, watching Victor with the quiet focus of someone who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. She did not look afraid. She did not look angry. She looked like someone who had done everything right and was now watching it land exactly where it was supposed to. Victor excused himself to make a phone call. I watched him walk toward the far corridor, phone already at his ear, voice dropping low, calling his lawyer most likely, or trying to reach someone on the board who might still move in his favor. He was too late for both. I turned back to the lead auditor and began walking her through the partition access sequence, step by step, making sure every piece of evidence we had built overnight was handed over in a form that could not be questioned, challenged, or dismissed. The wall I had built around the truth was holding. And Victor was about to find out exactly how solid it was. Victor smiled at me from across the boardroom table, and that smile made my stomach tighten. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a man wears when he thinks he has already won. The 6 board members were seated along both sides of the long mahogany table. The room smelled like leather chairs and expensive coffee. The overhead lights were bright and cold. Sophia sat to my left, her back straight, her hands folded on the table in front of her. She looked calm, but I had spent enough hours in a small office with her to know the difference between calm and controlled. This was controlled. Barely. The lead auditor, Ms. Fowler, stood at the front of the room with a projected spreadsheet filling the screen behind her. She had reading glasses pushed up on her head and a voice that carried no emotion whatsoever. That kind of voice only belongs to someone who has delivered bad news so many times it no longer surprises them. She began speaking. The room listened. The numbers on the screen told a story that was hard to argue with. $420,000. Moved in small pieces over 11 months. Each transfer just small enough to avoid triggering the automatic oversight flag built into the company's financial system. Whoever set this up knew exactly how the system worked. They knew where the gaps were. They had used those gaps on purpose. A low murmur moved around the table. Victor let it settle before he leaned forward. He straightened his cufflinks first. That small, deliberate gesture was meant to remind everyone in the room that he was a man who paid attention to detail. A man of precision. A man who should be trusted. "This is deeply troubling," he said, his voice measured and grave. "An external breach of this magnitude points to a serious gap in our network security. I have been raising this exact concern with the board for the better part of a year." He paused and looked directly at Sophia. Unfortunately, those concerns were not prioritized. 2 of the board members exchanged glances. I watched that happen. It was the exact reaction Victor had aimed for. Sophia did not look at me. She reached into the folder in front of her and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the table without raising her voice, without pointing, without any of the dramatic energy Victor had just used. She let the paper do the talking. "That is a photocopy of a physical ledger recovered from the 14th floor," she said. "The handwriting on every line belongs to the man sitting at the head of this table." The room shifted. Victor looked at the paper. For exactly 2 seconds, something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, not fear, calculation. He was already building the next argument before the first one had finished falling apart. "Handwriting can be forged," he said, and spread his hands open on the table like a man with nothing to hide. "I have to say, I'm shocked that we've arrived at a point where accusations like this are being made without any real verification. This feels like a deflection." He looked around the table, pulling the other board members into his orbit. "We should be asking who benefits from pointing the finger at me. Who had the most to lose if this audit went forward cleanly?" He let that question sit in the air. 2 sets of eyes drifted toward Sophia. That was when I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. I picked up the bound report in front of me and walked around the table at a steady pace, the way you walk when you are not trying to convince anyone of anything because the documents in your hand are going to do that for you. I placed the report in front of the oldest board member, a man named Mr. Ashworth, who had been sitting with his fingers pressed together and his expression unreadable. "Page 1, I said, "is the certified diagnostic pulled directly from the building's network router. It logs every device that connected to the internal system and the exact timestamp of each action taken. The transfer on August 14th was initiated at 9:47 in the morning from a device with a MAC address ending in 9C2A. I waited a beat. That MAC address is registered to Victor Strand's personal laptop. It connected to the network using his board-level credentials. The transfer was not made from a compromised external source. It was made from inside this building, from a device that belongs to him, using a password that only he controls." Victor's jaw tightened, just slightly, but I saw it. I turned to page 3. "This is a digital receipt from a third-party cloud backup server. 6 days ago, A photograph of the physical ledger was uploaded to a personal storage account. That account is registered under the name V. Strand. I closed the report and looked at him directly. "You didn't just write it down," I said quietly, making sure every person at that table heard each word. "You photographed it and saved it. The forensic record is complete. There is no version of this data that leads anywhere except back to you." The room went absolutely still. Not the polite, waiting kind of still. The kind that follows something that cannot be undone. The kind where everyone in the room privately adjusts what they thought they knew 20 minutes ago. Victor opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Ms. Fowler, looked at Mr. Ashworth, looked at the report sitting on the table in front of the board members' hands. He had no more moves. Mr. Ashworth picked up the report and turned to page 1 without a word. Sophia spoke then, and her voice was the steadiest thing in the room. She did not sound like someone who had been running on no sleep for 3 days. She did not sound like someone who had been hiding ledgers and watching everything she built get used against her. She sounded like someone who had been waiting a long time to say something true out loud. "I am asking the board to vote on immediate termination," she said, "and full referral of this documentation to the appropriate authorities. The evidence is documented, verified, and sealed. The decision is yours." Mr. Ashworth set the report down and looked at the other board members. Nobody looked at Victor. That was the moment I knew it was finished. Not when the vote was called. Not when the result came back unanimous. The moment nobody in that room looked to Victor for a reaction anymore was the moment his power in this building ended completely. The vote took 4 minutes. The result was unanimous. I heard the elevator doors close behind Victor and I still did not move. I was standing near the far end of the boardroom, my jacket unbuttoned, the bound report still in my hand. The board members were gathering their things, speaking in low voices. Miss Fowler was packing her laptop. The room was full of quiet, purposeful motion. Everyone had somewhere to be and something to process. Sophia was standing at the window. She had not moved since the vote. Her back was straight, her arms at her sides. She was looking out at the city, at the gray mid-afternoon light pressing down over the buildings. From where I stood, I could not see her face. I walked over slowly and stopped a few feet away. She did not turn around right away. She just exhaled. Long and slow, the kind of breath that carries weight. The kind you save for the moment when it is finally safe to let something go. "It's done," she said. Not a question. Not a celebration. Just the words settling into the room like dust after a long fall. "It's done," I said. She turned then. Her eyes were tired in a way that sleep alone was not going to fix. The kind of tired that comes from spending weeks holding a version of yourself together that was never meant to be held that tight for that long. There was no trace of the boardroom posture left. She just looked at me, like I was the first familiar thing she had seen in a very long time. "I keep waiting for something else to go wrong," she admitted. Her voice was quieter now. The polished delivery was gone. She sounded like herself, whoever that was underneath all the titles and the pressure and the armor. "Nothing else is going wrong today," I told her. She gave a short, tired laugh. Not the kind that means something is funny. The kind that means you have finally stopped bracing. For days past, the Meridian Group held its annual partner reception on a Thursday evening. The building looked completely different at night. The harsh overhead lights from the past week were replaced by soft amber fixtures along the walls, and a live trio played near the main entrance, filling the atrium with something slow and warm. The space was full of people in good clothes holding glasses and talking the way people talk when the crisis is behind them and the version of the story they will tell later is already forming. I arrived in a dark suit and stood near the edge of the room where I could see most of it without being in the middle of it. Old habit. I watched the room the way I watch data, looking for patterns, looking for what did not belong. Sophia was near the center of the atrium talking to a group of people I recognized as partners from the firm's West Coast office. She wore a deep navy dress, simple and sharp, and she was speaking with both hands slightly raised the way people do when they are talking about something they genuinely care about. She looked settled, not performing, just present. I watched her for a moment longer than I intended to. My contract with the Meridian Group had been formally closed that morning. The final forensic report was filed, signed, and delivered. The legal referral was in motion. My work here was finished in every professional sense. There was no remaining task that required me to be standing in this atrium holding a glass of sparkling water at 8 in the evening. I set the glass down on a passing tray. I turned toward the exit. I got 3 steps. You were just going to leave. I stopped. I turned around. Sophia was standing a few feet behind me, 2 glasses in hand, one extended slightly in my direction. She had broken away from the group without any visible hurry, like she had been watching for exactly this moment. Her expression was somewhere between amused and something harder to name. My contract is finished, I said. I know. She held out the glass. That's actually what I want to talk to you about. I took the glass. She told me the board had approved a restructured financial oversight role at the meeting earlier that afternoon.
À permanent position.
Direct access to the executive team. Authority to flag concerns without going through the chain of command that had allowed everything with Victor to go unnoticed for so long. She reached into the small clutch at her side and produced a sealed envelope with the committee vote printed on the front and the formal offer letter already signed by the board chair. She held it out. I looked at the envelope. I looked at her. This is a real offer, she said. Documented, reviewed, and completely separate from everything else. I need someone I can trust to tell me the truth when the numbers don't add up. You've already proven you can do that. I took the envelope. She turned slightly to face the room, and without making a production of it, she reached out and linked her arm through mine, shoulder to shoulder, facing the same direction, in full view of every partner, board member, and colleague in the atrium. It was not a small thing. In a room full of people who had spent the last week watching her fight for her reputation, the gesture meant something. She knew that. She did it anyway. You could have just emailed me the offer, I said. I could have, she agreed. There was a small smile at the edge of her mouth that she did not try to hide. We stood there for a moment watching the room. The music was unhurried. The conversations around us moved like water, easy and unguarded. The building felt like a different place than it had 72 hours ago. I turned my hand and closed my fingers around hers. She did not pull away. She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder, just for a second, the way someone does when they have stopped pretending they are not tired. It was small and unguarded and more honest than anything that had happened in a boardroom all week. I did not calculate what it meant. I did not run the variables or build a case for or against what I was feeling. For the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, I let something be exactly what it was without trying to measure it. I'm not going anywhere, I told her. She squeezed my hand once, lightly, and did not let go. The trio played on. The city pressed against the glass outside, indifferent and bright. And somewhere between the data and the deadbolts and the days we spent carrying the same weight in a locked office, something had taken root that no audit in the world could quantify. I was exactly where I was supposed to be.